Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's November 24th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
I'm great. Better every day.
So are you ready for this week? Thanksgiving?
I am. I'm so lucky to be in Texas with both my children's families and kind of a free agent, so I don't feel the pressure. My apartment is too small.
You're not hosting?
And I'm not hosting.
Yeah.
So my expectation is that I'm going to get to spend time with both my children's extended families, and I'm lucky in that I feel as close to those extended families as I do to my own. So yeah, I'm ready because I have no particular work to do. I do think I'm going to be a sous chef to my son's mother-in-law who's hosting, and she's here in Austin. So I'm going to hope that I can help out being a sous chef there.
Awesome. Sous chef?
Yeah, I know. Thank you. I had to say it twice for you to get how clever I was this morning.
Yeah. Slow on the uptake there.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Thanksgiving dish?
So it's a family tradition. It is hard to make, but it is my favorite, and that's creamed onions. Interesting, I was talking to some friends of mine. They were saying, hey, isn't that a northern dish? And both your parents were from Knoxville, Tennessee. And it kind of is a northern dish. And thinking about it, I think it came from my dad's side. And he was in Knoxville from the age of 9 forward, but he came from California and Pittsburgh and Denver. But creamed onion, absolutely my favorite. If you don't have it on your menu, do it. The only thing is, don't become what I have become is, oh, Sue, your creamed onions are the best. Okay, they may be good, but the truth is peeling pearl onions is a pain.
Labor of love, huh?
I think when people say mine are the best, they're really saying, over to you, Sue, to peel the onions. How about you?
Yeah, this is great. If you really want to do it, why don't you go ahead and knock out those onions?
We'll eat it. That's exactly.
Yeah, we'll eat it for you.
That's exactly right. It's a Gordon family trait. So what's your fave?
I'm a classic stuffing guy. You can either really ruin stuffing and it can be bland and just a total afterthought, or you can do it really well and it can take the cake. There's also a couple traditional dishes from my family. I don't know if they're regional necessarily, but there's a sweet corn casserole that's really good. And then just the whole thing, everybody coming out and celebrating and bringing different dishes and stuff you'd only eat 1 or 2 times a year. It's a lot of fun. And as the kids get older and start to cement some of those memories in their mind of these favorite dishes and meals and experiences, it's just fun to watch.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get to some headlines.
All righty.
China has quietly funneled $200 billion into U.S. tech, infrastructure, and even an insurance agency for CIA agents. So how worried should we be about Beijing's hidden money in America? The U.S. is putting $1 billion of taxpayer-backed loans into restarting 3 Mile Island to power Microsoft's AI. Smart investment in reliable energy or a risky subsidy for big tech? From Texas defending partisan maps as states' rights to the White House moving to block state AI laws. And finally, we'll add a rapid-fire round of fragile Gaza peace talks, big mRNA news, Saudi Arabia's cash engine running low, and a quick update on what's going on in Ukraine.
What a great episode. Let's not mess it up.
See what we can do here. A new report from Aid Data at William & Mary finds that between 2000 and 2023, China's state lenders funneled about $200 billion into U.S. businesses and projects, more than any other country, covering nearly 2,500 deals across almost every state. A lot of this money has supported acquisitions or stakes in critical tech, infrastructure, energy, everything from semiconductors, robotics, data centers, often routed through shell companies in places like Caymans, Bermuda, and Delaware to hide the Chinese state connection. So, Sue, how should we think about this $200 billion as a classic national security vulnerability or just the reality of global finance?
It is a reality of global finance, and it is dollars, an investment. And it's dollars and investment at a time when the U.S. is still trying to figure out how to strategically invest in important technologies. And quite frankly, even to know what important technologies are going to be, since the government is less the developer of things that turn out to be strategically important. We've talked about this before. It used to be that the government had all the big programs, whether that was missiles or stealth or nuclear power, and we knew that those were important, so we knew how to control them, and now the development is on the outside. So companies need investment, and China is very willing to do this. This is a real strategic risk, and it's a strategic risk because China has a theory of the case, and that is to acquire, absorb, scale, and then dominate markets that they have identified are important to us. While we're sitting back, we're developing technologies, and we think that Chinese dollars are investment dollars, and they are really acquisition dollars. And there are a lot of examples going on of this kind of trend where U.S. initiates, invests, and develops, and then China says, based on its plans, we want to become investors. They invest and control, and then they ultimately take away. And you can see it with several examples, whether it's solar and photovoltaics or lithium-ion batteries or commercial drones, which is fascinating in terms of most of the listeners here, if they have a drone for their own use, they're using a Chinese drone because DJI is just everywhere. From my background, we talked about DJI in terms of the data that was collected and the potential for it to be subverted in Chinese hands. But I will just say that what they did was they stole a market. Robotics, to me, is one of the primary areas where we were the initial investor and developer. And basically, robotics is now disproportionately in China, from commercial to industrial robotics. And then semiconductors, we've already talked about.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting balance between U.S. companies that don't want to cut themselves off and they need the investment. I think there's policy being developed around it, and our focus needs to be helping companies think about the national security implications when they decide whose money they're going to take and what they're going to watch for.
Yeah, when we talked to Shannon Corliss about this, she was really cautious about knowing where your money's coming from because of the potential risk of IP going out to China, right? Is your concern more the aggregation of this? So like in isolation, some of these deals might not look bad because it's just this one company or this one sector. But when you look at $200 billion spread across the entire United States and across multiple industries, is that what's setting us up for more risk exposure?
Yeah, I think it's the aggregation that concerns me, and the juxtaposition of disaggregated development in the U.S. We have the most incredible innovation engine, and the permissiveness and the lack of government involvement in our companies directly is one of the reasons that they're so vibrant and so growing. But the juxtaposition is with a China that is very focused on 5-year plans and the technologies it needs. And so when those things come crashing together and you add $200 billion worth of investment, what you see is someone who has a purpose working against somebody who has a distributed intention. I think if I were talking to a commercial audience, not a policymaking audience, we've talked about that before. I'm kind of hearkening back to what you said, the conversation with Shannon, which would be protect your core technology, right? If it's core to you, don't let someone invest and don't have the authority or the leverage to be able to take it away. China's interest is not in a partnership. It's in substitution. And I think that is a really harsh thing to say. But they aren't partnering. They're trying to become the leader in the technologies, and their investment is not casual. If a deal requires tech transfer, it's not a deal, it's a trap. And the cost advantage isn't efficiency for you. It's about industrial policy for them. And supply chain dependence becomes a strategic vulnerability. So I think our commercial companies need to think through that. I'd love it if they'd take on national security interests, but I think even for them, these are really important things for them to consider. So it worries me because it's strategic one side and it is disaggregated on our side. 5G is just a great example of a straight efficiency play from our perspective. We want the high profit things, and now look at us. Huawei is dominant. It's really hard to get back into that market, and it has real problems.
Yeah, well, Fortune dug into that air data work and some of the strategery. And a former official was quoted as saying China was playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. One of the examples is a resurface of an article from 2015 when an American insurer called Right USA specialized in liability coverage for FBI and CIA agents. They were quietly purchased by Fosun Group, a Shanghai-based conglomerate led by Gao Guangchang, a billionaire with high-level Communist Party connections. Wright had this very niche business that was little known outside of the intelligence circles. So the company, founded back in the 60s by a former FBI agent, became a financial lifeline for CIA and other officials who came under fire for their conduct in office or needed expensive legal help. Its clients included former CIA Director George Tenet, Scott Mueller, the agency's former general counsel. So when you put that all together with the broader lending picture, it's not just buying real estate in some of these unique tech structures, but they're also purchasing companies second and third level removed from sensitive nodes in our system, accessing data, getting information. So if you were building a threat assessment about this kind of acquisition, what concerns you the most?
I worried a lot in my government role on the intelligence value from just insinuation into all our systems and what they knew about. I've talked to you before about the holy grail of intelligence is intent. If you understand somebody's intent, then you can look much more broadly at a bunch of activities and say, here's how I'm going to influence or shape the outcome that they have from their intention. And so the intelligence value, the names of all the people that are in the national security apparatus that are, by definition, decision makers if they're buying liability insurance. Right. So that's really useful. And you can go all the way back to the China's access to OPM that just gets data. So I used to really focus on that because of the intention piece. Now that I'm outside and you just see the strategic importance to our positioning globally of our innovation engine and just how strategically China has gone after that, and not exclusively China, but they just are really muscular on this one. I see that as evidence for the moving away of some of the things that are most important to us. So my focus is on getting actors outside the government to recognize that this is going on so they can make decisions. Because quite frankly, I would rather the companies make the decisions about how to protect because they are best at knowing how they can protect and be profitable. And then kind of a paid political announcement. I'm still pro-U.S., pro our system, because if China's approach is to steal what we've developed, they're always behind.
That's true.
They're always behind. Don't take this as, we need to change to a more state-run, state-organized approach. Really, we just need to keep working on our engine, understanding that the world's not a peaceful place and there are adversaries and competitors who would shape what they're doing. Big topic. And Eric, it really is the point of what we're talking about. Our national strength has to be tended to, and in a lovely way. And we haven't talked in this case specifically about state and local decision makers. China turns around, as do other nations, and they become investors in our localities. If you see what China is doing globally and the way they're investing and then consequently owning countries globally, my line about it's not about partnership, it's about substitution. We focused here on what companies should do. There's a similar thrust about how states and localities should think about foreign investment dollars.
So from other people's money, let's talk about our money. How the U.S. government is using taxpayer-backed loans to shape the energy system that will power AI and everything else. Last week, Department of Energy approved a $1 billion federal loan to restart nuclear reactor on 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. The plant, now being rebranded as the Crane Clean Energy Center, would bring an 835-megawatt reactor back online that shut down in 2019. And a huge chunk of that power is slated to go straight to Microsoft's data centers under a long-term deal to feed its AI operations. The frame is affordable, reliable, secure energy in the U.S. Don't say the woke clean word anymore. But critics are asking why taxpayers are effectively insuring the risk of restarting an aging nuclear reactor at the site of one of the worst commercial nuclear accidents in U.S. history back in 1979. This is at 3 Mile Island Unit 1, but it's the same site and shares the name with 3 Mile Island Unit 2, the reactor that partially melted down. I think this is good. Seems like the case study for government investment. The Energy Department's Loan Program Office said Constellation, the company that's going to manage it, could complete the project without them, but it would have passed the cost on to the customers. Instead, we've got a loan here that'll make electricity cheaper for consumers on the grid that serves almost 65 million people across 13 states. It's not a grant, so taxpayers will see a return on this capital. Sue, what are your thoughts on this $1 billion loan?
I'm with you, Eric. I think this is, on balance, good. It's a good use of taxpayers' dollars. Reliable energy is a national security interest. When I'm talking national security in this moment, I'm talking about how we have a strong, vibrant nation that can do what it wants to do, whether that is for its people internally or to be able to have influence globally. So being strong, being energy sufficient, not just self-sufficient, but energy sufficient, I think this is a really important issue and a good use of taxpayer dollars. And I think there are really good things that come when you have a government program. They tend to be reliable dollars. Even as those words come out of my mouth, I'm not sure.
Starting to question that.
I'm thinking about the fact that this administration has canceled projects for which there were appropriated funds.
True.
Especially in the energy sector, if it is energy in which it doesn't believe. So I'll have to think about that a little bit. But in general.
Remember the windmills.
Yeah.
Remember the windmills.
Yeah.
They're so unsightly, though. Ugh,
Yeah,
that's the problem with them, right? No, I don't care. It's all about diversification. It's all about energy independence.
And
I'll let you finish your thoughts. Sorry.
I drive a lot. I've driven from my home, Virginia, to Texas, so that's across half the country. I don't find windmills unsightly in the slightest. As a matter of fact, I think when you look out, sometimes a field of windmills looks statuesque and interesting. So, yeah, that's goofy. But in general, government investment, back to the topic, sorry, y'all. Government investment is reliable. And in nuclear energy, you and I have both gone on record saying that it is, in fact, a reliable 24/7 baseload electricity supply that will power a lot of things, including AI, but also just reliable power against an aging infrastructure that we have right now. This is good. There are, of course, cons to U.S. investment, particularly when it seems like the dollars are going to a single company without competition. Or, and you mentioned it, sometimes the public has a long memory about, we don't want to do that again. I think 3 Mile Island is one of those things. Interesting, I think it's one of those things for boomers. I don't think the millennials think a lot about 3 Mile Island.
No,
right?
I don't think so.
Everything kind of moves on. You know that I am pro using taxpayer dollars for important, long time horizon, foundational things that need refreshing. And over the last 20 years, it feels like the U.S. government has shifted that load to commercial to do the innovation and the investment, and that's been good, but that tends to be more tactical. So I love government investment in big problems that require year-over-year investment.
We got a couple more on the horizon. The Energy Department is supporting the restart of the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan with a $1.5 billion loan to Holtec International. And then Next Era Energy announced in October plans to restart the Duane Arnold nuclear plant in Iowa through an agreement with Alphabet's Google unit. So more to come. Again, lowering costs to the end consumer, because if the companies were to take a commercial loan to do this or fund it in-house, not sure what rate they're getting on this, but as long as we get better return than a T-bill, I think it's a win.
I do too. And I think government investment signals bankability, and then you get private investment in it. There's just a kind of beefiness. If the U.S. government says it's a player, that you then see private equity and venture money flowing into those areas.
Well, let's talk about congressional maps and AI laws now. We talked previously about Texas redistricting effort, and then more recently, the passing of Prop 50 in California, which would do the same thing following the elections in early November. A three-judge federal panel in Texas, however, just blocked that new map, saying there's strong evidence it was racial gerrymandering that diluted Black and Hispanic voting in violation of the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution. Its since was reinstated by Justice Scalia and looks like it will be going before the Supreme Court probably before too long to discuss whether Texas can do this outside of the normal 10-year and census periodicity. But the Texas-specific story gets even wilder. In a 104-page dissent, Judge Jerry Smith basically torched his colleagues' opinion, saying it would deserve an F in law school, accusing them of cherry-picking in the highest order, and rewrote the word dissent some 15 times.
Yeah, this question on gerrymandering is for sure going to go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And the question of who controls it, race versus politics, I think these are real issues that need to be addressed. We've talked about where we stand in terms of how you do it. Interesting, I did a little bit of digging into what the founders said about this, and it is a state-local issue until it's not. So that's really what the Constitution says in general is the federal government can leap in when they decide that what the states are doing are not consistent with the national values. And I think this is a really interesting, multifaceted, multi-issue topic that's going to have to be addressed over and over again. This administration has a view of what the federal position should be. And so that's an interesting influence on this. I do think it's one of those issues that people need to keep their eye on. And again, we've talked about what we want to highlight, and that is those issues that are headlines and big topics, and how individuals, how do you vote regardless of what the districting is? You still have the power of what you say, and how state legislatures exert their powers. So I think this is a great example of we can't long for a simpler time. We can't rely on some sort of rule that is going to tell us what to do. This is really going to be a national decision about how we want to govern interests.
So let's tie this back to some national security interests in this argument of federalism versus states' rights. Politico reported that the White House is preparing an executive order to stop states from writing their own AI laws. A leaked draft says the administration wants the Justice Department to set up an AI litigation task force whose whole job it is to go back into court and knock down some of these previous AI laws, arguing an inevitable patchwork of state regulators would disrupt interstate commerce and slow innovation. That's something the AI and crypto czar David Sachs has been talking about a lot recently. The order would also have the Commerce Department flag onerous state AI rules and potentially threaten federal broadband funds for states that don't back off. So involving the FTC and FCC, they would be told to build federal standards that override the conflicting state rules. And meanwhile, some allies in Congress are trying to tuck a moratorium on state AI laws into the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, effectively blocking states from enforcing existing or future safeguards for a decade. So on AI, the message is this is too important to leave to a state-by-state patchwork, and the Fed should be in charge. One of the off-cited examples is emissions regulations in cars in California. By California setting stricter laws, it caused the automakers to have to make cars that were compliant nationally. And that caused a lot of extra costs that was then pushed onto the consumers. So is that backwards from national security and the rule of law perspective? Should we be at least as worried about manipulating representation as we are about fragmented tech rules?
Yes. I'm sorry, you want more?
No, that's good.
No.
Next topic.
Yeah. So we talked about the gerrymandering, and I agree with you that that's one where I feel states, by and large, have that responsibility to do it. And again, the timing. And there are examples with AI in terms of other technologies that the federal government has stepped in. You mentioned one, but we could talk aviation, where it just feels like both from an interstate commerce or a national security perspective. Again, national security writ large, there are reasons to step in technologies. And with AI, you and I have, I think, pretty consistently said that market forces alone aren't enough, that this is a technology that has real strategic implications well beyond the kind of tech leadership that we've talked about. So getting government in general involved is an important piece of how AI is going to be advanced. So if you just took them as abstractions, you'd say, yeah, I can see the involvement of both these issues. It becomes difficult now that this administration has made it clear that it has an opinion on what American values are, whether that is on education. And you take Stephen Miller's comments about we're going to teach young people to be American. I thought we've been doing that, but there are very different views of what American is and how narrowly you need to define values. Against that backdrop and that reality that we're wrestling with as a nation, if you then say that the federal government is going to dictate how AI is going to be implemented in the states, which historically has been where we think we want the states to drive because there are local cultural imperatives that need to be advanced. Now you're going to have the federal government on this one dictate essentially cultural issues through control of AI. And that's where the conundrum is. It's not out of bounds historically for the federal government to be involved in regulation, but do you want the federal government dictating through AI what kind of cultural and outcomes that we get locally? So I'm nervous about the federal government this early, especially this early in the development of this technology, to be the one governing how it will be implemented.
On the one hand, we've argued before that we think AI needs to be trained on the whole of the human experience. When you withdraw some of that information, that starts to shape those inherent biases. And that's one of their arguments and concerns at the federal level is you might get, at least in this administration, you'll get some blue states that push woke AI and they restrict certain things that go into the training of it, or they'll restrict certain outputs. Whereas back to this argument of the automakers, that's an off-sided example of, hey, if you let the states set their own regulation, it's going to be worse. The Clean Air Act, California was able to impose stricter emissions regulations. And what ended up happening was they made 50 state compliant vehicles that met California standards instead of manning two distinct fleets. And then actually elevated the overall emission standards. So you have this idea of the states making it more restrictive, which you could argue is better for everyone nationally.
So that's a great argument for non-federal control early, because essentially your auto example is one of competition. You had different people taking approaches. Then people decided that what California came up with wasn't so bad. We're going to adopt that. And then what we have is higher emission standards. And no matter what people want to say, we should worry about the environment and clean air. So when states have room in areas of national concern, we often come up with competitive solutions. And we love that, right? We're essentially field testing new ideas. I like that. And I think it produces, in general, good ideas when we have diversity of approach through the states. When you were talking about the federal government legislating kind of cultural norms, I think we have to talk about that AI is a federal concern, and yet what women can do with their bodies is a state concern. That we don't talk about how insane it is that we're like, yeah, states should be able to decide what women do with their bodies. But, you know, this AI thing is super important. We're going to govern it at the federal level. And so this administration's inconsistency and apparent decision-making based on their view of what is right and placing it either as a state's issue or a federal issue as the best way to shape the outcome they want is what gives these issues real legs in terms of disagreement. And again, I don't mind disagreement and tussling it out because that's what our nation is made on. What I dislike is an administration using its power to decide which way it goes without the national dialogue that goes with it. So legitimate issues, legitimate placement and legitimate federal interest in these areas and discussion over whether the states have it or not. What's different about this moment in time is the superimposition on a moral view of what's right and how we want to control that.
And the race. Which one helps us win the AI race against China?
Exactly.
Is it the federal level, or is it a patchwork of states?
So you raise a great point. You and I are both national security concerns kind of people. But again, because there are so many loopholes to make something a national security issue and consequently take that authority up to the federal level is, again, one of the reasons that I have concern about the decision-making of where the power lies. Like, because AI is so nascent, and if you use your California automaker example, I actually like states having the authority, not just from the cultural, regional differences, but the competitive. Maybe we're test driving various approaches at a time where we don't know what the one approach is. And so the state power is one that actually serves the national interest more.
It should not be the NDAA. Like keep this out of the Defense Authorization Act.
That's what I meant with you're using national security to avoid the national dialogue about where it should be. I talk about it all the time. This is a moment in the world, and certainly in America, of strategic uncertainty. And so it isn't wrong that we discuss what the right way to do things is. And it isn't wrong that the federal government says, there are some issues that are so important to us that we want to have an answer. The issue is, do you have the dialogue, and are you using all the powers and the checks and balances in order to come up with a good solution?
All right. I think we'll come back to this one sometime.
Maybe.
It's not going away for a while. Let's switch to some of these rapid fire updates.
Rapid. Let's see if we can't do that.
Yeah. Emphasis on the word rapid. All right. First, the UN Security Council has now approved the U.S.-backed Trump peace plan for Gaza, authorizing a transitional authority and an international stabilization force that's supposed to secure the ceasefire and lay a path toward Palestinian statehood. Russia and China abstained, Hamas has rejected the plan and refused to disarm, and Israeli strikes and rockets haven't actually stopped. On paper, we have a UN-endorsed roadmap. On the ground, it still looks like active conflict. Seems like this would add legitimacy to it, but what do you think about the 20-point plan being approved by the UN, Sue?
I like the 20-point plan being approved, just as I loved the U.S. involvement in coming up with a framework that would allow us to move through all the steps to get to peace. I think that's lovely, and I don't think there's any harm in it. But just like I felt with the initial announcement, and now with the benefit of a couple months of activity, it comes down to whether the participants are going to abide by it, and they're not. They didn't almost from first day, so this is lovely, and yay, and now it's legitimate. But unless Israel and Hamas and the other participants believe in it, all the paper in the world won't matter. So I don't think we can claim this as a war that's been solved just because we have a piece of paper that we like. Though, if someone would follow this plan, I think that would be a good thing. I just don't think we have any evidence that we're on a path to doing that.
Pfizer announced that their mRNA flu shot just beat the standard flu vaccine in a large phase 3 trial with about 30 to 35% relative improvement in preventing lab-confirmed flu in adults, and results published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Side effects were more common, but still in the normal range. In episode 5, we talked about how HHS was cutting $500 million in grants for mRNA research and how this was the exact type of research the government was suited for. This is less an example of the private sector, Pfizer in this case, investing in this research on their own. Stage 3, it's been around and in work for some time, but more an illustration of how this science could continue to add and advance our disease prevention. At the same time, the CDC quietly changed its vaccines website to say that vaccines do not cause autism is not an evidence-based claim, and they suggest that studies supporting a link have been ignored. That change was reportedly pushed by political appointees at HHS, not CDC scientists, and groups like Autism Science Foundation and the American Academy of Pediatrics are calling this misinformation that contradicts decades of research showing no causal link between vaccines and autism. From the little soapbox that I have here, I'd like to say that science still says vaccines do not cause autism. So when you put those two together, real progress on mRNA tech and politicized messaging from the CDC, what do you think?
I think my soapbox is right alongside yours. One, yay science, yay mRNA, yay private investment to continue to advance the use because it will save lives. However, that is a near-term situation. And again, I say government funding of basic research is incredibly important to all these advances. So yeah, we're still going to see advances and people are going to say, see, the government doesn't need to do it because Pfizer did it. But Pfizer is building off of foundational research that was done. And if we underfund that, whether it's for cancer, I care about that a lot because my cancer needs more work. Then on to the CDC, I continue to say that I think this secretary is the most dangerous that we have to national security because what it does, I'm not going to go into the specifics of it, but what it does is it basically undermines the health of our citizenry and makes them question what they should be doing, and it's driving people away from things that we know work, whether that is the progress we're making on autism, because these are real questions that have been asked that now are being overturned, or science in general, people that aren't getting their kids vaccinated because they believe that whether it's causing autism or just not right, all this stuff. And a government that chooses a side based on politics, that there is one or two studies that refute science. That's called peer review. It's already been adjudicated. Let's move on. But it's undermining public confidence and causing decision-making based on political views rather than some things that are typically apolitical. There is some goodness tactically with the vaccine, but strategically, all of this is undermining the safety and security of the nation because it's calling into question whether we'll have a resilient population.
The most dangerous secretary for
Absolutely.
national security.
For me, without question, because if we don't have a healthy, resilient population, we can't have anything else.
Yep. Just think about his diabolical laugh. Ma ha 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 ha.
Well, and I just think the thing that people need to know about that is look into the money involved in the wellness industry that is being set up as a counter to the science-based thing going on. There is a lot of money, and he's involved in a lot of that money. Yes, I'm for wellness. Yes, I believe in integrative medicine. Yes, I believe that healthy diets. Yes, all those things are true. But don't think that it's just the money in the pharmaceutical industry that is an influence. There is a lot of money in this wellness industry that is being used to counter the science. Most dangerous secretary.
Let's talk about Saudi Arabia. The New York Times reported that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's giant sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund, or PIF, is running low on deployable cash, even as he's in Washington talking about $1 trillion in future Saudi investment in the United States. After nearly a decade of hyper-ambitious spending, mega projects like NEOM, luxury tourism, splashy tech bets, a huge share of their nearly $1 trillion in assets is tied up in illiquid, underperforming, or delayed projects. According to reports built off Saudi and Wall Street sources, reps have started telling partners there's very little new cash available for big fresh deals, and the fund is leaning more towards borrowing and on bailing out earlier projects. What do you make of this limited deployable cash? If the cash engine is tighter than advertised, that could be poor investment management, or just this vintage or time period of investments needs to come to maturity. Does that make Saudi Arabia a more brittle partner, a more aggressive one, or does it actually moderate some of the risk-taking that we've been seeing?
It makes Saudi visit to the United States even more important, right? We bring in legitimacy. They walk away with an F-35 deal. They get a handshake. And again, even though I am worried about U.S. leadership globally, we are still a partner of choice. And when we make a decision about what is a good investment, the world tends to follow. In the same way I say government dollars inspire private equity and VC within the U.S. So I think that Saudi's visit to the U.S. was timely for this issue. If you look at the sovereign wealth fund and the change in leadership in Saudi Arabia, everyone has been going after Saudi money. If they weren't thoughtful in who they invested in, if you think about it just in terms of how many companies and how many ideas don't succeed compared to the ones that do,
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a maturity internal to Saudi Arabia that you need to worry about. But they are a nation state. They are more brittle, and they're going to have to be more careful. But I do believe that they're going to be equally opportunistic and equally sought after because of their regional influence and size. So individuals should be careful. The U.S. has already said that we are a partner with them. I think our willingness to make a big defense deal with them and overlooking Saudi policies kind of on a human rights level, talking about Chicago, we overlook that and we invest in them anyway, has said where we are, and it signals that we don't think they're off the market as an investor.
Japan and China. Beijing has reacted so aggressively to Japanese Prime Minister remarks that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a Japanese military response. Less about one sentence and more about three things. Japan breaking with years of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan, the Prime Minister's identity as a nationalist pro-Taiwan leader, and China's domestic need to show strength ahead of the 80th anniversary of Japan's World War II defeat. In response, Beijing has rolled out the full economic coercion toolkit, threats and bans on Japanese seafood and beef, travel warnings and mass tourist cancellations, cultural boycotts, and hints about rare earths and other trade levers. The campaign is paired with harsh propaganda and even a wolf warrior moment where China's consul general in Osaka posted and then promptly deleted a beheading-style threat against the prime minister. What do you think, Sue?
I think Japan is doing what we have avoided doing as a nation. I, with Admiral Mike Mullen, did a study for the Council of Foreign Relations, led a task force that looked at this issue of should this idea of strategic ambiguity persist, or are they basically getting their way by convincing it that if we say anything, that bad things will happen. And so we have been hesitant to be as aggressive, and Takashi wasn't. And she said the things out loud, and it's consistent with Japan's increased investment in defense. The words don't surprise me because we have talked about them even if we haven't affected them, even if this administration, interesting enough, while suggesting it's tough on China, has stayed really far away. I think you're seeing how important this issue is, how concerning the idea of a engaged Japan is to China, and they're pulling out their arsenal to say, you talked about it, how dare you talk about it, we're going to punish you from talking about it. So what I would translate this action into is this is a real issue for China to try and keep Taiwan as their issue, not a global issue. Japan may have walked into it casually with the new administration, but I don't think there's anything new in their discussion. And the U.S. really needs to talk about this issue because the decision about what China is going to do vis-a-vis Taiwan is 100% in Xi's head. We don't control that timing, but we better have an opinion nationally about how important Taiwan's independence is to us and what we are going to do if China decides that it is going to make an aggressive move to reunify. So to me, the U.S. issue is look at what just comments engendered, and let's start having that conversation here.
Well, other conversations we're having here are about Ukraine peace process. So there's a lot ongoing. Some reports from Sunday into Monday. There's been positive movement on that front. But essentially, there was a 28-point proposal drafted without Ukrainian involvement that would require Ukraine to surrender to Russia the entire eastern Donbass region and even lands that Russian forces have not captured. The United States would recognize that as Russian territory. No NATO forces could be based inside Ukraine. The Ukrainian military would be limited to 600,000 troops, which is a 25% cut from their current levels. It barred them from possessing long-range weapons that could reach into Russia. And in return, all sanctions on Russia would be lifted and the country would be reintegrated into the global economy. David Sanger of the New York Times said many of these 28 points offered by the White House read like they were drafted by the Kremlin. And Thomas Friedman over the weekend called it Trump's Chamberlain moment, referencing Neville Chamberlain and the appeasement prior to World War II. So what do you think?
I think this is a great example of how irresponsible the United States is being as a great power. We are confusing as all get out. Who in the world can rely on anything that we say? So first it comes out this 28 plan, which is, can we remind that Russia invaded a sovereign territory? And so one of those points is that Ukraine is sovereign. No, you don't need a peace plan to assert that. So that's already true. But even in the last 48 hours since this peace plan was leaked, you have Marco Rubio coming out saying, oh, no, that's not really what we're working. And then you have reports coming out that we are getting really close with Ukraine on a peace plan. And then you have President Trump coming out and calling Zelensky the bum in this situation. What is U.S. policy? If we want to be one of the great powers in a new world order, one of the things we have to be is dependable, consistent, and people need to be able to know what we're doing. And this is just one more example of how irresponsible we're being on important issues globally and trying to get a deal without having a moral center of our policy. And you can't have a moral center of our policy if you don't discuss that policy with Congress, if you don't discuss it with the American people, and then you behave this way. So I think it is an abomination. Just like our discussion on Gaza, you can have all the peace plans you want, but if they don't include the parties and the parties aren't going to agree, what you see in this leaked plan is what Putin would agree to. Zelensky will never. And so you have these bilaterals between the U.S. and independent parties coming up with agreements that we know the other one would have. So are we serious? Come on, U.S. Let's be who we are. And I see no indication that we are being anything other than irresponsible when it comes to Ukraine. And to be clear, I don't think the Biden administration did the things it could have done either. Even though it was not as confusing as this, they too were not moving as aggressively toward the kinds of things that would lead to the resolution. But this is an important issue for free and open societies. And it is an important issue for the U.S. in terms of what our theory of the case is and who are we globally. China and Russia have staked out their claims. What's ours?
Yep. It's 8 points better than the Gaza peace plan, though. So
that's exactly more. More is better. So it must.
More points. Now, everybody around the world is watching this, right?
Yeah.
Every leader and autocrat in Africa, in Southeast Asia, around the world are watching how this plays out. Another thing I haven't seen at all discussed in these proposals are the children. You know, that was a big push when right after Putin came to Alaska, and then we had all the European leaders meet in Washington, D.C., and they discussed, and the chancellor of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, made that a big point. I did not see that as one of her big points coming out of the weekend. So need to continue pushing that discussion for the kids.
Yeah, and more than that, if you really can't get at the big issues, start showing progress by peeling off the issues that should be easy. So make a deal on the children right now. Right? It's the same way I feel about the Epstein issue. That should be an easy unifying issue for the U.S. Go ahead and make that, and we can move on to some of the tougher ones. So I love that you bring up the children. Like I said, the world is aligning itself newly, and it isn't just the autocrats that are looking at these. These are the undecided free and open societies that are saying, I don't know, maybe I've got to cut a deal with China or Russia in order to be safe if the U.S. isn't going to be a participant in that in the way it has been in the past. Tough stuff.
All right, moving into next week. What are you watching, Sue?
All the same issues. I still look at the Supreme Court on voting rights. I think that's a really big issue just in terms of the gerrymandering. There are a number of issues that have been out there. As they get resolved, they're going to tell us what direction we're going in as a nation, whether it is one of a unitary executive that can act as an autocrat, just making decisions about what they do with complicit other branches of government, or is the system working through its response? We will see the workings of our democratic institutions in order to balance that. So I think the voting rights is one, continued presence in cities of U.S. forces. Where's Venezuela going? I don't think we're going to see resolution of those issues because I think the systemic response just takes more time. But it's worth watching before we go running, screaming off the abyss, saying that we're stuck with executive branch only actions. This is just the way things work. They have the power right now, and systems are a little slow to respond. But I think that's what I'm watching is you continue to see the system trying to get into these decision-making cycles, and will they be balancing some of the things that I think have been I probably don't get to say unconstitutional because I'm not the adjudicator of that, but to me seem counter to the intention of our national foundation.
What do you think the markets are going to do going into the end of the year in this holiday season? Are your concerns about a potential AI bubble satisfied, given NVIDIA's record earnings that came out last week?
I'm still worried about AI. NVIDIA, remember, is powering a lot of AI. I think the bubble I'm worried about is more on the generative AI side, the overconfidence in things like ChatGPT and Claude and the various Gronk. There's just a whole bunch of those. I think there is overconfidence in what those are going to do in order to advance how everyone works. And we're seeing slowness and insinuation into real work processes. So I think there's a bubble around that. NVIDIA's earnings are more, they're powering a lot of the less risky, more common AI things, and then just computing in general. So, nope, I'm still worried about it. I think we're going to see a lot of volatility just with every pronouncement, every decision made. Is it advantageous? Is it not? Where are we going with tariffs? They seem to be rolling back, and I think they're rolling back because the administration is feeling the pressure of an economy that they can't assert is good when people are actually going to the store. And so we'll probably see that a bit. How about you,
Yeah.
Eric? What
Awesome.
are you watching this week?
I agree. The NVIDIA earnings are not a sign of anything that has changed. I think you could have expected that they went gangbusters and sold a bunch of stuff because that's what we've been talking about for this whole year up to date. But it doesn't say anything new about the overextension and some of the circular financing and some of the other companies that have made significant promises of investment and have very limited revenues to date.
I think the two are different. I agree with you.
Yep.
You said it much more clearly than I did.
Just summarizing your thoughts. The Comey indictment, watching that, former FBI director James Comey and some of the federal grand jury issues that the prosecutors are coming under. The judge had some rather frank remarks for the prosecutor. She's never prosecuted a criminal case. And so there's some procedural issues, and they're taking some issues with how the government is approaching this case. So interested to see if that even goes to trial. We kind of suspected it would not.
I think that was our first prediction in our first episode.
And then also watching some of the continued fallout on this video from the senators and congressmen, some of the veterans of the intelligence community and the military put out a video reminding the military that they are not required to follow or shall not follow a unlawful order. I think it got a lot of headline and a lot of traction because the president came out and called it seditious behavior and enhanced some of the political rhetoric of violence that we at times have called for an end to, but now is saying that these folks are seditious behavior and could be hanged. But I think it's a good reminder for the troops, right? It's not anything that they don't already know, but I think it's valuable to have that support. And if anything, it could have been taken just as, oh yeah, cool, thanks for the video, or that was just a thing that was said. Instead, it's gotten a lot of visibility and a lot of traction.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The other thing we talk about is leadership for the leaders in the military. It's a really good reminder of their responsibility, right? Because the troops are not the ones that are going to be adjudicating that. So it's the leader's responsibility to be in that chain of lawful versus unlawful. I think it showed exactly where we are as a nation. And it showed two very different views of what kinds of things we ought to be talking about and how we're going to have to protect our nation. You know where I come down. I think the video was just fine, and I think the response was over the top and representative of you can't talk about anything other than the goodness of my policy, just like I link it a little bit to Trump's response to the Epstein thing, which is, that's a distraction, and it takes away from me talking about what I want to talk about. This is a tough moment. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's see if your sappy friend Sue can get through this. is just what I'm thankful for, right? You and I have talked about, despite this moment for America, I really have a lot of confidence in the American people if they're going to pay attention to what's going on, and that our systems, while they're being damaged, the American people can always rebuild systems if they'll stay engaged. So I'm thankful for that. In a really personal sense, my journey with cancer has given me a number of things. Number one is my village, not just my family who are amazing, but my village of friends has really rallied for me and given me strength on days that strength was hard. And you and I talk about it all the time. I believe in the goodness. So I'm thankful for my village, but that I have one gives me confidence that there are villages like that everywhere. And then the last thing, and you know this, I talk about it all the time, I'm really thankful for my medical team. The medical community has been under a lot of siege, whether that is the insufficiency of our healthcare system in general to provide for all Americans, regardless of their financial wherewithal, or insurance companies that do or do not have patients and doctors' interests at heart, or science. It's all been under siege. I will tell you, man, from Dr. Brown and Dr. Hallerstedt to Christina Martinez and Aaron Selvage to the teams that do it, I will say the story of our health system's demise is also premature from a personal level. So I got a lot to be thankful for. Plus, living in the same time as all my grandchildren is just the best.
Yeah.
It's craziness good. So
Yep.
that's what I'm mostly thinking about is the gifts. And I would encourage everyone to think about the things with which they are graced and gifted, and you'll see beyond some of the things that are difficult.
There you go. Well, that's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us. We are very thankful for all our listeners and folks who've stuck with us through 19 episodes and counting. There's no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
I forgot to say one of the things I'm thankful for, because I have a couple of visitors, that I got to be a part of Duke women's basketball. Because when I talk about my village, that is one of the longest lived villages I have. And this week I had a couple teammates that came to see me. So as always, thanks for joining us. We love having you here. We love talking to you. Leave comments on the links below and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can also see us on Instagram and little clips. We continue to learn and grow. We try and be better every day for you. And as you leave today, just remember, go forth, do good, and especially be kind to one another. It makes a difference.